Nevada Territory, spring of 1878. The wind, a restless spirit, swept dust devils across the high desert as the sun bled orange over the jagged peaks of the Humboldt Mountains. Dawson Creed was about to settle his skillet over the flickering fire when the distinct crunch of footsteps broke the silence, uneven and labored. Instinctively, he reached for his rifle, but the sight that emerged from the twilight froze him. A woman, her bare feet bloodied and raw, her dress little more than tattered rags hanging from one shoulder, as if torn apart by the very landscape. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, seemed to look through him. Her face, gaunt and streaked with dirt, told a story of relentless hunger. She stumbled into the periphery of his firelight, and without uttering a single word, collapsed. Dawson dropped the rifle, his concern overriding caution, and was at her side in 2 swift strides. "Ma'am?" His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the frantic drumming of his heart. "Hey, can you hear me?" She was alive, but her breaths were shallow and ragged. Dried blood matted her hair, and her hands were a tapestry of scrapes and cuts. Gently, he eased her onto a thick blanket, her body unresponsive as a discarded doll. She was shockingly light, near starvation. He piled more wood on the fire, its warmth a beacon against the desert chill, grabbed his canteen and carefully trickled water between her parched lips. Her throat moved in a desperate swallow, and a small, almost inaudible moan escaped her. Whether it was pain or relief, he could not decipher. "Easy now," he murmured softly, his voice a soothing balm. "You are safe here." He moved with purpose. He removed the skillet from the fire, allowing the stew to cool before spooning small amounts of broth to her lips, his movements tender and deliberate. Then he wrapped his heavy coat around her shivering frame. She drifted in and out of consciousness, never speaking. He continued to feed her broth until she finally succumbed to a deep, exhausted slumber, curled tightly under his spare blanket. Dawson retreated, settling back to watch over her in the firelight. She appeared to be his age, perhaps 23 or 24, and despite the grime and the ravages of her ordeal, a trace of pride lingered in her face, a hint of the woman she had been before whatever tragedy had brought her to this desolate place. He had witnessed the breaking point in others. Starvation was a cruel and efficient weapon. He stoked the fire, lit his pipe, and maintained a vigilant watch. By morning she stirred, a faint groan escaping her lips. He was already awake, tending the fire and brewing strong coffee. She blinked slowly, her gaze darting around the campsite, then pushed herself upright with a sharp intake of breath. "You're all right," Dawson assured her, his voice gentle. "You passed out. I gave you water and some broth." Her voice was a raspy whisper. "Where am I?" "About 30 miles north of Austin. You've walked a long way." She glanced down at her ravaged dress, then back at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "You didn't touch me?" "No, ma'am. Just made sure you didn't die on me." She nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face, then pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "I'm sorry. I don't even know how I got this far." He poured her a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and handed it to her. "Name's Dawson Creed." She accepted the cup, clutching it with both hands as if afraid it would vanish. "Henley Oaks," she said after a long, hesitant pause. "Thank you." "You want to tell me what happened, Henley?" Henley turned her gaze towards the horizon, where the sun was painting the desert in hues of gold and rose. "I ran," she said finally, the word barely audible. 3 days ago." He waited. "I was working at a laundry in Virginia City, living in a boarding house. Then a man came, said he'd marry me, spoke all the sweet words that make a girl feel like maybe she isn't so alone in the world." She looked down at the coffee, her shoulders slumping. "He was lying. He took me out past town, stole what he wanted, and left me there to die." Dawson's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively clenching around the tin cup. A dark fury simmered beneath his calm exterior. She continued, her voice devoid of emotion, a flat recitation of horror. "He broke my ribs, took my shoes. I walked for 2 days before I found a stream, then just kept walking. I thought I'd die last night, but you didn't let me," Dawson said quietly, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "You made it to my fire, Henley." Henley stared into the flames, as if searching for the shattered pieces of herself within their depths. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." "You don't have to figure it out today. I've got no family left, no money, no food." Her voice cracked, her eyes dry but empty. "Even my name feels like it belongs to someone else now." "Well," Dawson said, standing and breaking the heavy silence. "You're welcome to stay here a few days. Rest, eat, get your strength back. I'm headed to Fallon in a week. You could ride along if you wanted." She hesitated, her gaze searching his face. "Why are you being so kind?" He looked down at her, then crouched so they were eye to eye, his gaze unwavering. "Because I've been alone and hurt before, and someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. That's reason enough for me." Henley studied his face, searching for any hint of deceit or ulterior motive. Then she gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. She stayed. For the first 2 days, she did little more than sleep, her body desperately trying to heal. Dawson respected her silence, offering simple meals and fetching water from the nearby creek. He meticulously repaired her dress where he could, using scraps of sturdy canvas from his pack to mend the worst of the tears. He never pried, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer, allowing her to heal at her own pace. By the 3rd day, she was sitting up by the fire, devouring eggs and beans with a genuine hunger that warmed his heart. "I'd forgotten how good food could taste," she said, a hint of color returning to her cheeks. "You're starting to look like yourself again," he replied, a gentle smile gracing his lips. She smiled faintly, but a shadow lingered in her eyes. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "I think you will," he said, his voice filled with conviction, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. On the 4th morning, she helped him saddle his horse, her movements still tentative, but her hands steadier. "You're a cowboy?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Something like it. I break horses mostly, work ranches where I can find them. Been riding alone for a long time." Henley looked at him, a question in her eyes. "Do you like being alone?" Dawson paused, considering his answer. "Used to think I did." She nodded slowly, then glanced at the fire, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought I'd feel safe around a man again. Do you now?" She met his eyes, her gaze direct and honest. "Yes." That night, they sat close by the fire, their shoulders almost touching, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger. The stars blazed across the inky black sky, and the desert wind had calmed to a gentle whisper. Henley turned toward him, her voice soft. "You saved my life, Dawson." He shook his head, dismissing her gratitude. "You saved yourself, Henley. I just happened to have a fire burning." She reached for his hand, her touch hesitant but filled with a quiet strength. He did not pull away, their hands entwining in a silent acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she whispered, her voice laced with a raw honesty. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the firelight. "Neither do I." The morning they broke camp, the air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sagebrush warmed by the early sun. Henley adjusted the canvas Dawson had stitched into her dress, her fingers moving with a newfound purpose. She didn't speak much as they loaded the mule and saddled his horse, but her silence was different now, filled with a quiet contemplation. Dawson handed her a canteen, his eyes filled with concern. "You ever ridden before?" "Once," she said, testing the weight of the canteen in her palm. "A mule from Gold Hill to Dayton. I fell off halfway there, much to my embarrassment." He didn't laugh, just nodded, his gaze gentle. "You'll ride with me then. Horse's name is Bramble. He's steady as they come." When she settled in behind him on the saddle, her hands hovered for a moment before resting lightly at his waist. The gesture was cautious, but not distant, a tentative embrace. Bramble shifted once, then stepped out slow, his gait smooth and rhythmic. Dust rose behind them as they turned east towards Fallon, the vast expanse of the desert stretching out before them. Henley leaned slightly to one side, her voice near his shoulder, barely audible above the wind. "What's in Fallon?" "Cattle buyers, mostly. There's a ranch a few miles out where I worked last season. Might be a place for you to earn a bit of coin if you want it." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing the information. "I can sew. Men did laundry for years, and I helped the boarding house cook when she drank too much to stand. Folks always need steady hands, Dawson," Dawson said, his voice reassuring. "And you've got them in spades." The road narrowed as they passed through a rocky pass lined with volcanic rock, the landscape stark and unforgiving. A jackrabbit darted across their path, startling her. Bramble didn't flinch, his demeanor calm and steady. Henley's grip tightened momentarily, then relaxed as she regained her composure. That night, they camped in a dry wash, sheltered from the biting wind. Dawson knelt to build a fire, his movements efficient and practiced, while Henley unpacked the food sack, her actions deliberate and helpful. She moved slower than him, but there was a newfound steadiness to her steps, a sense of purpose that had been absent just days before. She didn't wait to be asked, just began slicing the smoked meat and laying it in the pan, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You ever think about leaving Nevada?" she asked, while the fat sizzled in the fire, filling the air with a savory aroma. He leaned back on his heels, watching the sparks dance towards the darkening sky. "Thought about Oregon once, then Arizona, but I always end up circling back here, can't say why. Maybe it's the open space or the stubbornness of the land that reminds me of myself." She lifted the pan, setting it on a flat stone to cool, her movements careful and precise. "I used to think I'd end up in San Francisco, a place I'd read about in dime novels. The ocean always sounded like forgiveness, a chance to wash away the past." Dawson nodded, understanding her yearning for a fresh start. "Maybe someday, Henley." She handed him a strip of meat, then kept one for herself, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "What about your people? You got any kin nearby?" "No. Folks are buried near Elko. My sister's grave, too. After they were gone, I rode off and didn't look back, consumed by a grief that swallowed everything in its path." Henley didn't press, sensing the pain that still lingered beneath the surface. The fire crackled between them like a shared breath, a silent understanding passing between them. She chewed slowly, watching the glowing coals, her thoughts swirling like the smoke rising into the night. "You're gentle, Dawson," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "But I don't think you were always." He looked at her then, his face unreadable in the firelight, his eyes reflecting the harsh realities he had faced. "I wasn't, Henley. Life has a way of hardening a man." She didn't ask what had changed him, what had softened the edges of his soul. Later, as the stars thickened overhead, blanketing the sky in a tapestry of light, she stretched her legs towards the fire, seeking its warmth, and tipped her head back, gazing at the celestial display. "It's strange," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've slept under roofs most of my life, surrounded by people, but I've never felt as safe as I do out here, under the vastness of this sky." Dawson lay back on his bedroll, folding his arms beneath his head, his gaze fixed on the same stars that captivated her. "Might be the company, Henley," he said, his voice low and steady, not smiling, but something in his tone was softer than before, a hint of tenderness creeping into his gruff exterior. Henley didn't answer right away, savoring the quiet companionship. Then she turned her head towards him, her eyes filled with a quiet wonder. "You're the first man I've met who didn't want something from me right away, who saw me as more than just a woman." "I want something, Henley," he said after a long pause, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. She stilled, her breath catching in her throat. "I want to see you stand tall again, to reclaim the woman you were meant to be. I want your hunger gone and your name to be yours again, not something stolen and tarnished." Wind moved through the brush, carrying the fragrant scent of cedar, a subtle fragrance that filled the air. Henley's eyes didn't leave his, her gaze unwavering, searching his soul. That's a kind of wanting, Dawson. I've had time to think about the kind that isn't, and I know the difference. They didn't touch that night, but the space between their bedrolls seemed to shrink, their presence drawn together by an invisible force. The next day brought wind and grit, and a sky that threatened rain, a harsh reminder of the unforgiving nature of the desert. They rode in silence for long stretches, but it wasn't an empty silence, but one that held a comfortable rhythm, like the land around them. By late afternoon, they crested a rise, and Fallon came into view as a scattering of low buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, fences stretching like stitched seams across the earth. A testament to the resilience of those who dared to carve a life out of this desolate landscape. Henley leaned forward, her anticipation growing. Smaller than I pictured, but there's a certain charm to its simplicity. Big enough to start over, Henley, Dawson replied, his voice filled with a quiet optimism. There's a woman here named Coralie, runs a dry goods store. She's fair and honest, a good soul. She might know someone who needs help. Henley didn't speak as they rode into town, but she sat straighter in the saddle, her shoulders squared, her gaze fixed on the path ahead, ready to face whatever the future held. Coralie looked up from behind her counter when they stepped inside, her hair wrapped in a practical red kerchief. "Dawson Creed," she said, setting down her ledger, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I thought you'd vanished off the face of the earth. Been a long time since I've seen your face around these parts." "Just been riding, Coralie. This is Henley Oakes." Henley gave a polite nod, her demeanor reserved but respectful. "Howdy," Coralie said, her eyes studying Henley with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. "You look like you've seen some miles and they haven't been kind to you. You good with a needle, girl?" Henley nodded once, her reply simple and direct. "Got a pile of flour sacks that need stitching, and my eyesight ain't what it used to be. You do that well, I'll see about finding you more work. Good help is hard to come by these days." Henley's answer was simple and confident. "I can do it." Dawson turned as she stepped behind the counter with Coralie, his heart filled with a sense of hope for her future. He started towards the door, intending to give her space to settle in, but Henley called his name, her voice clear and strong. He paused, turning back to face her, his eyes filled with anticipation. She walked up to him, her hands still at her sides, her gaze searching his. "Will you stay in town a while, Dawson?" He looked at her, his voice quiet and sincere. "If you want me to, Henley, I will. I've wandered long enough, and I think I've finally found a place worth staying for." He nodded once, his eyes conveying the depth of his feelings. "Then I will," she replied, her voice filled with a newfound determination. And for the first time since she had stumbled into his firelight, Henley smiled without the weight of sorrow behind it, a genuine smile that radiated warmth and hope. Rain came to Fallon 2 nights after Dawson and Henley arrived, a welcome respite from the arid desert. It started as a soft whisper on the rooftops, a gentle lullaby, then gathered strength, transforming into a torrential downpour that soaked the dirt streets, turning them to mud and drawing the earthy scent of juniper from the parched earth. Dawson stood beneath the porch overhang outside the boarding house, his oilskin coat dripping, his arms crossed as he watched the sky unleash its fury, a sense of contentment washing over him as he witnessed the cleansing power of the rain. Henley stepped outside behind him, holding a small tin lantern, its flickering light illuminating her face. "Coralie let me take some work back with me. She said I had a good hand with seams and a keen eye for detail." He glanced at her, his expression filled with pride, then back at the rain-slicked street. "You did well in there, Henley. Coralie is a tough woman to impress, but she saw something special in you." She tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the lantern light. It felt good being useful again, to have a purpose beyond just surviving. They watched the water thread through the wagon ruts for a while, the silence between them comfortable and easy, filled with unspoken understanding. "I saw a boy today," Henley said, breaking the silence, her voice thoughtful. He was no older than 6, but already working a broom outside the livery stable, his small hands gripping the handle with a surprising strength. He looked proud of his work, as if he was contributing to something important. "There's dignity in work, Henley. Dawson replied, his voice filled with conviction. "Even the hard kind that breaks your back. It gives a man a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning." Henley shifted her weight slightly, her gaze fixed on the rain-soaked street. "I used to believe that with all my heart. Then I stopped after everything that happened. I think I want to believe it again, to find that sense of purpose that I lost." The rain softened, becoming a steady rhythm on the roof, a soothing soundtrack to their quiet conversation. Henley didn't move back inside, drawn to the shared silence and the unspoken connection between them. "You going to stay on here in Fallon, Dawson?" Dawson asked, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I haven't decided yet," she said, her voice thoughtful, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But it's the first place in a long while where I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, where I can finally breathe without the weight of fear pressing down on me." He nodded once, understanding her hesitation, then looked at her fully, his eyes filled with sincerity. "You don't have to decide tonight, Henley. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of deception. "You're staying nearby?" He gestured across the way, his hand outstretched. "Room above the smithy. It's plain but dry, and the sounds of the hammer and anvil remind me of the honest work that keeps this town alive." A faint smile touched her mouth, illuminating her face with a gentle warmth. "I'll be careful with the lantern," she said, stepping back inside, her voice filled with a quiet promise. The next morning brought clear skies and the sound of hammers ringing through town, a symphony of industry that filled the air. Dawson crossed paths with Henley near the pump well as she filled a bucket, her movements graceful and efficient. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing her strong forearms, and her hands moved with practiced care, drawing water from the well. "I think Coralie might keep me on, Dawson," she said, glancing down at the water, her voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. She asked if I'd stay through the end of summer, help her manage the store while she takes a much-needed vacation. "Do you want to, Henley?" Dawson took a step closer, his gaze intense and unwavering. Henley looked up, meeting his eyes, her expression unreadable. "I think I do, Dawson. I think I've finally found a place where I can heal, where I can rebuild my life and maybe, just maybe, find happiness again." Dawson took another step closer, closing the distance between them, his voice low and tender. "Then I reckon I'll be here too, by your side, every step of the way." She studied his face, her expression softening, her eyes reflecting the depth of her emotions. "You've moved on from a lot of places, Dawson. What makes you think you'll stay here?" "Never had a reason to stay before, Henley," he said, his voice filled with a quiet passion. "Never had someone worth staying for." She didn't say anything for a moment, her thoughts swirling like the water in the bucket, then passed him the bucket, her touch lingering on his hand. "Will you walk with me, Dawson?" They moved down the street together, their footsteps in sync, the morning sun warming their backs, their shoulders almost touching. As they passed the blacksmith shop, the smith glanced up, offering Dawson a nod of acknowledgement, a silent greeting between two men who understood the value of hard work and the importance of community. Dawson returned the nod without breaking stride, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Henley glanced sideways, her curiosity piqued. "You've got folks who know you here, Dawson, people who respect you, enough to get by, enough to build a life." They stopped in front of the dry goods store, the scent of spices and dried herbs wafting from within, filling the air with a comforting fragrance. Henley set the bucket down at the door, then turned to face him, her eyes filled with a newfound confidence. "I've been thinking, Dawson," she said, her voice clear and strong. "That man who hurt me, he didn't take everything no matter how hard he tried. I still have my hands, my thoughts, my voice. He can't take those away from me." Dawson's reply was quiet but filled with unwavering conviction. "He never had those, Henley. Not for a second. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She looked down, then back up, her eyes shining with determination. "I don't want to be defined by what happened to me, Dawson. I want to build something, even if it's small, something that's mine, something that I can be proud of." He stepped closer, his voice low and filled with admiration. "You're already doing that, Henley. You're building a new life brick by brick, and I'm honored to be a part of it." Henley reached for his hand, her touch tentative but filled with warmth. "You helped me remember that I could, Dawson. You showed me that there's still goodness in the world, even after everything I've been through." He didn't speak, but he didn't let go of her hand, their fingers interlacing in a silent promise of support and unwavering companionship. Later that week, Dawson found work hauling fence posts for a rancher outside town, the monotonous labor a welcome distraction from the turmoil of the past. The pay was modest but steady, providing a sense of stability, and the days passed with the steady rhythm of hammer and sun, a comforting routine that soothed his weary soul. In the evenings, he'd find Henley sewing in the back of the dry goods store, her fingers moving surely over worn fabric, transforming discarded remnants into beautiful and functional pieces. One evening, as dusk settled over town, casting long shadows across the dirt streets, she handed him a folded bundle wrapped in brown paper, her eyes filled with a quiet excitement. "What's this, Henley?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "Open it and see, Dawson." Inside was a shirt, simple but finely stitched, the seams neat and strong, a testament to her skill and attention to detail. Henley met his eyes, her expression filled with a mixture of pride and affection. "You needed a new one, Dawson. Yours was getting a bit worn around the edges." He held it in both hands, his throat tight with emotion, overwhelmed by her thoughtfulness. "You made this for me, Henley?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "I wanted to give you something that would last, something that would keep you warm and remind you of me." He ran his thumb over the edge of the collar, his touch reverent. "Then I'll wear it until it falls apart, Henley. It's the finest shirt I've ever owned." They stood close, the shop quiet around them, their presence drawn together by an invisible force of love and mutual respect. "I want to build something too, Henley," Dawson said, breaking the silence, his voice filled with a newfound purpose. "With me, Dawson?" Henley's breath caught in her throat, but her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "You sure about that? I come with a lot of baggage, a lot of broken pieces." "I've been sure since the first night you sat by my fire and didn't run, Henley. You're the bravest woman I know." She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let's build it together, Dawson. Let's take those broken pieces and create something beautiful and lasting." He lifted her hand to his chest, holding it close to his heart, his eyes filled with a love that transcended words. "We already started, Henley. That night by the fire, that's where our story began." The first frost came early that year, blanketing the landscape in a shimmering coat of white. By the third week of October, the cottonwoods along the river had dropped most of their leaves, their skeletal branches reaching towards the sky, and the wind carried a sharpness that made even the shortest walk brisk. Dawson had taken to chopping extra wood in the evenings, his sleeves rolled, his muscles straining, and his breath forming in clouds by the time the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Henley stood on the porch of the dry goods store, her arms folded tight across her middle, watching him, her heart swelling with affection. The hem of her newly sewn skirt caught the breeze, swirling around her ankles, and she watched Dawson split another log with one clean swing of the axe, his movements strong and efficient. The rancher's wife, Mrs. Keene, asked if I'd teach her youngest daughter how to read, Dawson, she said once he looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. Dawson leaned on the axe handle, his expression curious. "You said yes, didn't you, Henley? I can see it in your eyes. You love teaching." "I did, Dawson. The girl's sharp as a tack, just hasn't had anyone patient enough to sit still with her and unlock the magic of books." He rested the axe against the wall and stepped up beside her, his presence radiating warmth and comfort. "You plan on teaching her here in town or out at their place?" "They offered me a wagon ride out twice a week, Dawson. It's 5 miles each way, but I told her I didn't mind the distance. The solitude of the ride will give me time to reflect." "You don't mind?" he said, not as a question but as an observation. Henley shook her head, her smile serene. I like the quiet, Dawson, and it gives me time to think, to sort through my thoughts and find clarity. They stood there a moment, the wind tugging gently at her sleeve, the unspoken connection between them as strong as ever. I've been wondering, Dawson, she said, her voice lower now, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. When you were younger, before all this hardship, what did you dream of being? What made your heart soar? He blinked once, surprised by her question, then glanced down at his boots, his expression thoughtful. Didn't think about it much, Henley. Life came fast after my sister passed, a whirlwind of responsibility. I just kept moving, trying to stay afloat, never had time to indulge in dreams. But if you had, Dawson, if you had the chance? He hesitated, his gaze lost in the memories of the past. There was a black stallion once, belonged to a neighbor near Elko. A magnificent beast with a coat like polished obsidian and a spirit as wild as the wind. I used to sneak over the fence just to watch him run, his hooves thundering across the earth, his mane and tail flowing like black silk. I thought maybe I'd raise horses like that someday, train them from colts, not just break them, teach them something steadier, something more than just obedience. You still could, Dawson. It's never too late to pursue a dream. I'm not 20 anymore, Henley. I'm weathered, scarred, carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Henley tilted her head, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. You're young enough to still build something meaningful, Dawson, to leave your mark on this world. He looked at her then, his eyes steady and filled with a newfound hope. Maybe I already started, Henley. Maybe you're my dream come true. That night, Dawson lit a lantern in his room above the smithy, casting a warm glow on the rough-hewn walls, and set to working on a small wooden frame. His hands, though calloused and used to heavier work, moved with surprising care as he fastened together the first pieces of a saddle stand, his brow furrowed in concentration. It wasn't much, a simple piece of furniture, but it was something he'd never had reason to make before, a symbol of his growing commitment to Fallon and to Henley. Across town, Henley sat in the back room of the store, her fingers flying across the fabric as she sewed a winter shawl from scraps Coralie had let her take, her heart filled with a quiet contentment. Her stitches had grown faster and more precise with practice, but her thoughts moved slower, her mind filled with dreams of the future. She found herself thinking of the way Dawson had looked when he described the black stallion, his eyes shining with a longing that mirrored her own yearning for a brighter future. She wondered what it might feel like to give someone that kind of steady place to return to, a safe harbor in a storm. The next Sunday, they walked out past the edge of town together, carrying a loaf of cornbread she'd baked that morning, its warm aroma filling the air, a simple offering of love and companionship. They didn't speak much until they reached the ridge overlooking the basin where the grazing fields lay pale beneath the autumn sky, a vast and beautiful landscape that stretched out before them, a symbol of the endless possibilities that awaited them. Henley sat down on a sun-warmed rock, smoothing her skirt, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. I thought I'd never want quiet again, Dawson, she said after what seemed like an eternity, her voice barely audible above the gentle breeze. The silence scared me, felt like it would swallow me whole, leaving nothing but emptiness. Dawson crouched beside her, his presence reassuring, his hand gently touching her arm. It can, Henley, if it's the wrong kind of silence, the kind that's born of loneliness and despair. But lately, Dawson, she said, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her gaze softening. It's felt different, not empty, just clean, like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life without the noise and chaos of the past. Dawson nodded, understanding her transformation. It's the kind you choose, Henley, the kind you fill with love and laughter and the simple joys of everyday life. She reached into the bundle and broke the cornbread in half, handing him a piece, her eyes filled with affection. The wind rustled the grass below, a soft sound like paper turning, creating a gentle melody. I used to think I'd end up living someone else's life, Dawson, she said, her voice filled with a newfound self-assurance. like mine wasn't worth building on its own. I thought I was destined to be a supporting character in someone else's story. He ate slowly, his eyes on the horizon, his thoughts swirling with a mix of sadness and admiration. You're not someone's shadow, Henley. You're a force of nature, a woman with a spirit as strong as the desert wind. You're capable of anything you set your mind to. And you're not just a man passing through Dawson, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. You've got roots now, even if they're shallow. You're building a life here in Fallon, a life filled with purpose and meaning. I want them deeper, Henley, he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. I want to put down roots that will last, to create a legacy that will endure long after we're gone. She didn't answer at once, her heart swelling with a mix of love and hope. Then, setting the rest of her bread aside, she took his hand, her touch warm and comforting. Then let's press them down together, Dawson. Let's build a life here in Fallon, a life filled with love, laughter, and the enduring strength of our shared dreams. They stayed out on the ridge until the light turned gold, painting the landscape in a warm and inviting glow. When they walked back through town, hand in hand, they passed a boy sweeping the steps of the church, his small hands gripping the broom with a surprising strength. Henley paused, crouched, and handed him the last wedge of cornbread, her eyes filled with kindness. He beamed, his face lighting up with joy, then dashed back inside the church, his heart filled with gratitude. Dawson watched her, his heart swelling with a love that knew no bounds, a sense of completeness settling low in his chest. That night, as they stood outside her room above the dry goods store, the silence between them was thick with unspoken emotions. She didn't step away from him, her gaze lingering on his face. "Are you cold, Henley?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual, his eyes filled with concern. "No, Dawson," she said, her voice soft and filled with a quiet passion. "I'm warm enough, warmer than I've ever been in my life." Then she leaned in, her movements hesitant, and he met her halfway, their lips meeting in a tender kiss. The kiss was unhurried and gentle, like everything between them, earned and carefully chosen, a symbol of their shared vulnerability and unwavering commitment. When they broke apart, breathless and flushed, she touched her forehead to his, her eyes shining with a love that knew no bounds. "This is mine, Dawson," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. "Not borrowed, not faded, but chosen. This is my life, and I'm finally ready to live it to the fullest." "It's ours, Henley," he said, his voice filled with a matching passion, "and neither of us has any cause to doubt it." Snow came late that year, but when it did, it came heavy, blanketing the landscape in a pristine coat of white. By early December, Fallon lay under a thick quilt of white, the rooftops softened by the snow, and the dirt roads buried in a serene silence. The river slowed beneath a rind of ice, its waters flowing with a deliberate slowness, and smoke curled from chimneys and long, steady ribbons painting the sky with ethereal brushstrokes. Dawson shifted the last of the firewood into the small lean-to behind the smithy, brushing flakes from his collar, his muscles aching from the cold. His knuckles ached from the cold, but he didn't mind the work, finding a sense of satisfaction in providing for his loved one. The days had grown full in a way he hadn't known before, measured not by distance traveled, but by the hours he shared with Henley, the moments of quiet intimacy that filled his heart with joy. Henley had taken a room across the yard from Coralie's, a cozy space that was warmer and more inviting, with a stove that held a good fire through the night, chasing away the winter chill. She kept a small pot of rosemary growing by the window, its fragrant scent filling the air, and hung her sewing neatly. And so, under the vast Nevada sky, Dawson and Henley found solace and a chance to rebuild, not just their lives, but their faith in humanity. Their story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of kindness and love in the face of unimaginable hardship. It reminds us that even in the most desolate landscapes, hope can blossom, and broken pieces can be woven into something beautiful and enduring. What are your thoughts on Henley and Dawson's journey? Did any particular moment resonate with you? I'd love to hear your interpretations or any questions you might have in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. And if you enjoyed this tale of second chances and the blossoming of an unlikely love, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories of the West. We'll keep the fires burning and the stories flowing. Thanks for watching.